joining me. My name is Edshara, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read towards the end of the month. I did a separate wrap-up for the books that I read at the beginning of the month, and I will leave a link for that in the cards up above if you want to check it out. And this video is going to be filmed over the course of 2 separate days, just because I'm still reading a couple of books, but the majority of them are due back at the library. Now, the first book that I'm going to mention is The Secret Life of Sarah Hollenbeck by Bethany Turner. This was one that I wanted to read this month, but it never came, even though I requested it at the end of December. And I can only think that perhaps, you know, maybe there was a computer error that told me it was available, or maybe someone checked it out before the librarian could get to it. I don't know. But I do know that it was shipped to my library, so I will have it for next month. Will I be in the mood to read it next month? I don't know, but at least I'll have it. And the next book that I have is Gunslinger Girl by Lindsay Eli. This is a book that was on my most anticipated reads for 2018 list, and it follows Serendipity Jones, who is the fastest sharpshooter out there, and she lives in an America that has seen a second Civil War. Now, from the cover art and the synopsis, I thought that this was going to be a futuristic Western with a strong female protagonist, and that is not what I got, at least from what I was actually able to read, because I did end up DNFing this book. Now, the writing was okay, but it wasn't necessarily interesting or engaging, and I found that I wasn't really invested in the plot or the characters. Within the first couple of pages of the book, there were a couple of characters that really irritated me, because this does follow the typical dystopian idea of women being treated as second-class citizens, and for some reason I wasn't necessarily anticipating that, or I wasn't expecting that, so that really kind of put me off, and I think it set the tone for the remainder of what I read. And then we have Serendipity, who she has these amazing skills as a sharpshooter, but she doesn't necessarily have the strength to properly utilize them. And so in order to set the scene for her to kind of find that inner strength, the author used another typical dystopian trope where something bad happens that Serendipity possibly could have prevented, and she didn't. And one, I thought it was completely unnecessary to the plot. It didn't need to happen. And two, it was a situation where Serendipity's skills were definitely needed and she didn't use them. And I just felt like that didn't go with who we were supposed to believe this girl was, or what we were supposed to believe she could do. And I continued to read a little bit longer, but I found that I was forcing myself and it wasn't getting better. There were some new or different elements that were unique for this author, but other than that, I just found that it wasn't something I wanted to finish. And so at around 130 pages or so, I did DNF this. And the next book is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, and this one follows a boy named Will who is setting out to avenge the murder of his older brother, Sean. And this one is written in verse, and I don't believe I've ever read a book written in verse, so I was very interested to see how I would like this, and I ended up really enjoying it. I gave it 4 stars. I think the thing that I liked the most was that Jason Reynolds chose to highlight an issue that affects African American communities and African American families, and yet it's not from outside forces, it's more from within our own community, because Will lives in a neighborhood where one of the rules is if someone takes out someone that you care about, you're supposed to get revenge. You're supposed to take those people out. And it's one of those things that plagues our community, but you know, it's not always talked about, or perhaps it's not always talked about in the right way. And so I felt that Jason Reynolds' approach to this issue was done very nicely. You got a good understanding of how this neighborhood works. You got a good understanding of the characters and who they are and what they stand for. Even though the book is told in verse and you get these short little chunks, you still got a good sense of, you know, everything that Jason Reynolds kind of wanted you to see within this neighborhood with these characters. And I also felt like even though the book moved really fast, or it was a quick read, you still got a complete story. That may be a little open for debate with the ending, but I still really enjoyed that there was a beginning and a middle and an end. And I'm really fascinated by this, and now I want to read more books told in verse. I will say, one thing that I have an issue with Jason Reynolds' works is I feel like I'm always he'll bring me to the edge, but he doesn't necessarily like push me over. And what I mean by that is I feel like this is only the second book of his that I have read, but the first book I read The Boy in the Black Suit, and I enjoyed that one, but it was only a 3-star read. And this one was good, and it had some interesting and relatable points in it, but at the same time, it was still like he could have done a little more. Like there was that 5-star moment was missing from this book. And even though I still want to read more of his work, and I would definitely highly recommend this book, it's not one that I think I need to own. It's not necessarily one that perhaps I would want to reread, but it was good. But I just feel like it was missing that element that would have made it great. At least that's my opinion. And the last book that I have to talk about for this portion of the video is A Gathering of Shadows by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book in the Shades of Magic trilogy. And I went into this one a little hesitant because I have seen a few mixed reviews from people, you know, not really liking it and giving it about a 2-star rating, to people loving it and giving it a 5-star rating. And I wasn't really sure where I was going to fall, but I'm so happy that I read it anyway because I loved it. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. It was so good. This book does have a lot of world building and character development. So if that's not really your thing, if that's not something you're interested, if you're more interested in, you know, in action and the plot kind of pushing along and getting to the bigger picture, then you may not like this one, but I thought it was really done well. I loved getting to know Rye and Kel and Lila and even Holland a lot better. I thought that it was interesting to see kind of how they thought and what their quirks were, and, you know, kind of how they moved through this world. I also really enjoyed getting a look at, you know, their romantic relationships as well as their friendships. And so I thought that this book was really well done. I am very enamored with V.E. Schwab's writing. This is only the 3rd book of hers that I have read, but I can tell she's probably going to become one of my favorite writers just because her books are so easy to fall into. The worlds are so descriptive and so just easy to imagine that it's just you find yourself engrossed in the story. You find yourself invested in these characters. You want to see how it turns out. You want to know how it ends. I loved the fact that she just didn't go with how book 1 ended and go right into sort of the bigger picture. I liked that she kind of drew it out a bit, but at the same time she gave you more of the magic system. She gave you, you know, some new characters, and then she kind of built up to get back to, you know, the issue that started in book 1. So I really enjoyed this. This is definitely a series that I am going to invest in at some point. I will probably still read book 3 through my library, but I definitely want to own this one because not only am I like excited to read book 3, but I want to reread book 1 so I can reread book 2. And even though I've read only the first 2 books so far, this is definitely probably my favorite book of the series, and I can't wait to continue it. And next up, up is Purple Hibiscus by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And this is a book that is talked about quite a bit here on BookTube, and I now understand why. I don't think I was properly prepared for the content that was in here, but I still really enjoyed it. The writing style is simplistic, but I think that fits Kimberly's temperament and her personality to a T, and since the story is told from her perspective, that made sense. And while the book does lack some of the flashy dialogue that you're used to seeing, I think that there were still some very profound thoughts and statements within the text, and I ended up tabbing a little bit. I also thought that the characters were familiar and relatable. You know, I have an aunt that could be, you know, Jaja and Kimberly's aunt. I have cousins like their cousins. So that was a very interesting thing to see. I also found myself really relating to Kimberly because, like her, I was very shy and quiet as a child, and so I relied very heavily on my older brother in social situations or when we got ourselves into trouble. I also was able to understand some of her thought process and, you know, how she would feel during situations and after situations. So that was very interesting to me. I also thought that this was a very good conversation starter just because you have some topics that perhaps are not easily approachable, and this book kind of bridges that gap a little bit. But while I really enjoyed this book, I did have moments where I had to put it down and step away from it for a day or two before I could continue to read it. I was angry at times and sad and frustrated and shocked, and so I would say that if you are easily triggered by stories of physical abuse, this is probably not the book for you. Even though I would highly recommend it because I do think it's well written. I did end up giving this book 4 stars, and I took a star just because I wasn't as in love with the ending as I was the rest of the book. I liked the ending, but I think I was expecting something a little bit different. Also, there was a relationship that Kimberly was having with a relationship that Kimberly had with an older adult. And while I do think it was innocent, at times I was a bit confused because I wasn't sure if I was supposed to think that something more could have been going on or not. So that was a little bit weird for me, but overall, like I said, this was really good, and I do think that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie could very well become one of my favorite authors. I can't wait to read more of her work. And lastly, I have The Last Samsara by Kristen Cicerelli, and this one was a bit difficult. It started off really well, and I thought, okay, this could be a 3-star read. It's not bad, but it could have been better. Towards the middle, I was thinking 2 stars, but then the last couple of chapters were really good, and so I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I enjoyed the idea of storytelling within this world and how it kind of had a bit of a negative impact, but I like also how it was interwoven with the dragons and the use of the dragons, so I thought that was very interesting. My biggest issues with this book were the fact that there are a lot of close calls and near misses, and after 2 or 3 of them, it was just like, okay, I get it. They're going to be in danger. They may suffer a little bit, but we know it's going to end somewhat favorably. I also thought that this book was a little on the long side. It was longer than it needed to be. It's a little over 400 pages, and I feel like the conclusion could have been had within 200 or 300 pages. I also didn't necessarily like the treatment of Asha. You know, here it is, we have yet another very strong female protagonist. She is this fearsome dragon slayer, and yet in her own home within the walls of the palace, because her father is a king, she's treated like a second a second-class citizen. And I really didn't like that, and I think I'm tired of seeing those dynamics within these worlds where we're supposed to believe these women are strong and brave, and yet they're kind of walked over within their own home. I don't like that. Also, this book is supposed to be the first in a series, and again, I don't necessarily see the need for this book to continue past 1. I'm not sure why everything has to be a duology or a trilogy, but this one is the first in a series. While I am potentially interested in reading a second book just to see, you know, because there were a few plot holes that were left open, I'm not really sure that it's necessary, but that's, again, my personal opinion. This is one that I would hesitantly recommend. If you're interested, maybe give it a try. Perhaps you'll like it a little better than I did. But that is it for the books that I read this month. I'm pretty happy with this month. I attempted to read 9 books, and I ended up finishing 7, and I still think that's a pretty good amount. I still would consider this a great reading month, which I think I already mentioned. But let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these and what your thoughts were, without spoilers, just in case people haven't read them yet. And until next time, guys, God bless. Bye. And there's always an orange cat that walks through the yard when I'm filming a video.